The turkey was carved, the wine was poured, and I was standing in the kitchen wearing an apron. Not just any apron, a frilly, pink monstrosity with "Kiss the Cook" embroidered across the chest in glittery letters. Elise's mother, Miriam, had insisted it was tradition for the sons-in-law to serve dinner, while the women sat in the dining room discussing important matters. What those important matters were, I couldn't say, but judging by the shrill laughter echoing from the other room, it involved gossip about people who weren't present to defend themselves. "Greg, the gravy's getting cold," called Julia, Elise's younger sister, from the doorway. She was holding her phone, probably live-streaming my humiliation to her Instagram followers. "And Mom wants you to use the good silver, not the everyday stuff." I gritted my teeth and ladled gravy into the crystal boat that probably cost more than my truck payment. Of course she does. This was my life now. Greg Dalton, former mechanical engineer, reduced to kitchen help at family gatherings. 3 years ago, I'd been running quality control for a manufacturing plant in Portland. Now, I fixed boat engines in a converted garage and got treated like the hired help at my own wife's family dinners. The other sons-in-law, Julia's husband Brad and Elise's cousin's husband Tom, shuffled around me in their own aprons, looking equally miserable. Brad caught my eye and shrugged apologetically. At least he had the decency to look embarrassed. "Remember when we used to eat with the adults?" I muttered to him as I arranged dinner rolls in a basket. "Shh," Brad whispered, glancing toward the dining room. "Miriam might hear you." God forbid we upset Miriam. The woman ruled this family like a feudal lord, and everyone danced to her tune. Everyone except me, which was probably why I'd been demoted from dinner guest to kitchen servant. I carried the first tray into the dining room, where 8 women sat around the mahogany table like a coven of well-dressed witches. Elise looked radiant in her burgundy dress, her blonde hair perfectly styled, diamond earrings catching the candlelight. She was laughing at something her friend Allison had said, not even acknowledging my presence as I set down the turkey platter. "Oh, Greg," Miriam said without looking up from her wine glass. "Make sure you warm the plates first. Cold plates ruin the entire..." About the town's new development project, gossip about neighbors, speculation about who was sleeping with whom. "Did you hear about the Hendersons' divorce?" Allison's voice carried clearly. "Apparently, he caught her with that contractor who's been working on the lakefront properties." "Carter Blaine?" Julia asked. "I'm not surprised. That man is absolutely shameless." Carter Blaine. I knew the name. He was some hotshot real estate developer who'd moved to town 6 months ago. Drove a red Porsche, wore expensive suits, and had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. "He's certainly attractive," Elise said, and something in her tone made me pause in the kitchen doorway. "Very driven." The other women giggled knowingly. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. "Elise!" Miriam scolded, but she was smiling. "You're a married woman." "I can appreciate quality when I see it," Elise replied smoothly. "Besides, Greg doesn't mind. Do you, honey?" All eyes turned to me. I stood there in my ridiculous apron, holding a serving spoon, feeling like a fool. The smart thing would be to laugh it off, make some joke about keeping an eye on my wife. But something about the way Elise was looking at me, challenging me, almost daring me to object, made my blood boil. "Not at all," I said finally. "I know exactly what kind of quality my wife appreciates." The words hung in the air for a moment. Elise's smile faltered slightly, and Miriam cleared her throat. "Well," she said briskly, "shall we have dessert?" I finished serving in silence, my mind racing. The way Elise had said Carter's name, the look in her eyes when she talked about him. It all felt wrong. We've been having problems lately, growing apart, but I'd attributed it to stress from my career change and her demanding job at the PR firm. Now I wondered if there was more to it. After dinner, while the women moved to the living room for coffee and brandy, I cleaned up the kitchen with the other men. Brad and Tom made small talk about football and work, but I barely heard them. I kept thinking about Elise's voice when she'd said the importance of appearances. Greg needs to be more ambitious, more successful, more like the kind of man a woman like Elise deserves. Speaking of doing things right, I said carefully, you seem to know a lot about that developer, Carter Blaine. Elise's fingers paused over her phone screen. He's a client. The firm is handling PR for his lakefront project. Ah. I nodded as if that explained everything. Must be nice working with someone so driven. She finally looked at me, her blue eyes unreadable in the dashboard light. It's refreshing to work with someone who has vision, someone who isn't content to just get by. The barb hit home, as it was intended to. I'd heard this criticism before, that I lacked ambition, that I'd given up after losing my engineering job, that I was settling for mediocrity with my boat repair business. Some of us find satisfaction in honest work, I said, and some of us want more than satisfaction. Some of us want success. We pulled into our driveway, and Elise was out of the car before I'd even turned off the engine. She disappeared into the house, leaving me sitting in the dark garage, still wearing the ridiculous apron. I looked down at the glittery "Kiss the Cook" message and laughed bitterly. When was the last time Elise had kissed me? Really kissed me. Not the perfunctory pecks she gave me when other people were watching. I couldn't remember. Inside, Elise had already gone upstairs. I could hear water running in the master bathroom. She was taking a shower. I poured myself a bourbon and sat in my recliner, trying to process the evening's events. My phone buzzed with a text from Brad. Sorry about tonight, man. Miriam was in rare form. I typed back. Just another fun family gathering. Hang in there. It gets easier. But did it? Brad had been married to Julia for 5 years, and he still looked miserable at family events. Tom had been dealing with his family for even longer, and he'd developed a nervous tic whenever Miriam spoke to him. Was this my future? Years of kitchen duty and casual humiliation, watching my wife grow more distant while I pretended everything was fine. My phone buzzed again. Shouldn't look. Checking your spouse's phone was a violation of trust, a sign that the relationship was already over. But the credit card charges, her reaction to Carter Blaine's name, the way she'd been distant for weeks, it all pointed to something I didn't want to believe. Her phone was password protected, but I knew the code. It was our anniversary date, though I wondered if she'd changed it recently. She hadn't. The phone unlocked, revealing dozens of unread notifications. Most were work emails and social media alerts, but there was a string of text messages from a contact labeled CB, Carter Blaine. My hands shook as I opened the conversation. The most recent message was from an hour ago. Missing you already. Can't wait for our next strategy session. I scrolled up, my stomach churning as I read weeks of flirtatious exchanges, compliments about her appearance, inside jokes, plans to meet for client dinners that were clearly something else entirely. And then I found the photos. They weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. Elise in lingerie I'd never seen before, posing in what looked like a hotel room. Carter shirtless, flexing in a bathroom mirror, the kind of pictures people only sent to lovers. The shower shut off. I quickly closed the messages, put the phone back on the nightstand, and retreated to the hallway. My heart was racing, and I felt like I might throw up. Elise emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her hair wet and slicked back. She looked beautiful, glowing from the hot shower. For a moment, I almost forgot what I'd just discovered. "You're up late," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Couldn't sleep. Too much coffee at your mom's." She nodded and began her nighttime routine. Moisturizer, hair products, the careful maintenance that kept her looking 10 years younger than her 41 years. I watched her in the mirror, this woman I'd been married to for 8 years, and realized I didn't know her at all. "Elise," I said quietly. Are you happy?" Her hands stilled for a moment, then resumed their methodical application of face cream. "What kind of question is that?" "An honest one." She turned to face me, and for a second I thought she might tell me the truth. But then her expression hardened, and she was back to Carter Blaine. The family that had never accepted me was probably encouraging it. Miriam had practically swooned when his name came up at dinner. I was the outsider, the failure, the man in the kitchen apron, while real men, like Carter, conquered the business world and stole other men's wives. But as I lay there in the dark, something else began to grow alongside the hurt and betrayal. It started as a small, cold flame in my chest and spread outward until my whole body thrummed with it. Anger. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. They thought I'd just accept whatever scraps they threw me while they laughed behind my back. They were wrong. I woke up before dawn with a plan forming in my mind. Elise was still asleep, her face peaceful in the gray morning light. She looked innocent, vulnerable, nothing like the woman who'd been exchanging intimate photos with another man. I slipped out of bed and went downstairs to make coffee. While it brewed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and did what any suspicious husband in the digital age would do. I investigated. Carter Blaine's social media presence was exactly what I'd expected. Instagram full of gym selfies, expensive restaurants, and photos of his Porsche. LinkedIn profile boasting about his disruptive approach to luxury real estate development. Facebook posts about his success, his vision, his commitment to elevating the community through strategic investment. What I found interesting were the comments on his posts. Lots of local women, married women, leaving flirty messages and heart emojis. Carter was a player, and he wasn't particularly subtle about it. I dug deeper, using search engines and public records databases I'd learned to navigate during my engineering days. Carter Blaine, 38, originally from Boston, divorced 2 years ago. His ex-wife had cited irreconcilable differences, but a deeper search revealed she'd also filed a restraining order that was later dropped. Interesting. His business, Blaine Development Group, was heavily leveraged and had been involved in several projects that ended in lawsuits with contractors and investors. The man was successful on paper, but his foundation was shakier than he let on. "You're up early." I looked up to find Elise in the door. Many times had I believed her while she was with him. "Have fun," I said. She looked at me sharply, as if checking for sarcasm, but I kept my expression neutral. After 8 years of marriage, I'd learned to hide my thoughts when necessary. After she left for the gym, I went through the house more thoroughly. In her home office, I found a second phone hidden in her desk drawer, a cheap, prepaid device I'd never seen before. It was password protected, but the screen showed several missed calls from C. I photographed the phone's serial number and put it back exactly where I'd found it. Then I searched through her other belongings, credit card statements, receipts, anything that might give me a clearer picture of her double life. What I found was systematic deception, going back 3 months. Charges for lingerie I'd never seen, restaurants she'd never mentioned, a hotel room in Portland that she'd claimed was for a work conference that didn't exist. But the most damning evidence was in her laptop browser history, which she'd forgotten to clear. Searches for divorce attorneys, articles about asset protection in Maine divorce proceedings, forums for women planning to leave their husbands. She wasn't just having an affair, she was planning her exit strategy. I sat back in her desk chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a midlife crisis fling. This was calculated, premeditated betrayal. My phone rang, startling me out of my thoughts. The caller ID showed Mick Sullivan, my oldest friend, and the only person who'd stuck by me after I'd lost my engineering job. "Hey, Mick." "Greg, thank God. I've been trying to reach you all week. We need to talk." "What's wrong?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me at the Loon's Nest? It's important." The Loon's Nest was a dive bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where working-class guys went to drink beer and complain about their lives. It was also where all the best gossip originated. The bartender, Frankie, knew everyone's business and wasn't shy about sharing it. "Give me an hour," I said. I drove to the bar in my pickup truck, a 10-year-old Ford that ran perfectly but looked shabby next to the luxury cars Elise's friends drove. I'd been thinking. Told me you might want to hear this, she said, wiping down the bar with a stained towel. About your wife and that developer. My stomach dropped. What about them? Honey, they've been meeting at Romano's twice a week for the past month. Always the same table in the back corner. Always touching hands and whispering like teenagers. Yesterday, I saw them coming out of the Lakeside Inn together. The Lakeside Inn was a boutique hotel downtown, the kind of place that charged $300 a night for romantic getaways. How do you know this? I asked. My niece works at Romano's. My cousin cleans rooms at the hotel. Word gets around. Mick leaned forward. That's not all, Greg. I heard from Tom Hendricks. You know, the electrician who's working on Blaine's lakefront project? He says Blaine's been bragging about his conquest, talking about how easy it was to seduce a desperate housewife. The beer turned to acid in my stomach. He said that? Tom heard him on a phone call with someone in Boston. Blaine was laughing about it, saying he had her wrapped around his finger and she'd do anything for him. I stared at my hands, trying to process this information. It was one thing to discover your wife was cheating. It was another to learn that her lover was bragging about it, treating her like a joke. There's more, Frankie said quietly. Blaine's been asking questions about you around town. Your finances, your business, whether you own the house outright. Like he's planning something. What kind of planning? Mick and Frankie exchanged glances. The kind where a man steals another man's wife and wants to make sure he gets her assets, too, Mick said bluntly. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just an affair. It was a setup. Carter wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was positioning himself to take everything I had. What are you going to do? Mick asked. I took a long drink of beer, considering my options. I could confront Elise, demand the truth, and hope for reconciliation. I could file for divorce and try to protect. There's something else, I said. I think Elise's family is in on this. The way they talked about Carter at dinner last night. The way they've been treating me lately. I think they're encouraging her to trade up. Frankie snorted. Miriam Ashworth's been trying to marry her daughters into money since they were teenagers. She probably sees Blaine as an upgrade from a boat mechanic. Then they're all going to be disappointed, I said, because I'm not going quietly. I spent the rest of the afternoon at Mick's garage, helping him with an engine rebuild while we planned my counterattack. Mick had connections throughout the blue-collar community, electricians, plumbers, contractors, mechanics. These were the people who kept the town running, who knew where the bodies were buried, who could make life very difficult for someone who'd made enemies. First thing we need to do is document everything, Mick said, as he torqued down cylinder head bolts. Photos, recordings, witnesses. If this goes to court, you want to be the one with evidence. Already started, I said, showing him the photos I'd taken of Elise's hidden phone. But I need more than just proof of the affair. I need leverage. What kind of leverage? The kind that makes them think twice about trying to destroy me. That evening, I was waiting when Elise came home from her client dinner. She looked flushed and happy, her hair slightly mussed, despite her attempts to fix it. She was practically glowing with the satisfaction of a woman who'd spent the evening being desired. How was your meeting? I asked from the living room. Productive, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. We made good progress on the campaign strategy. I'm sure you did. Carter seems like a hands-on kind of client. She froze, in the act of hanging up her coat. What do you mean by that? Just that he seems very involved in the details. Must be nice to work with someone so engaged. She studied my face carefully, looking for signs that I knew more than I was letting on. But I'd spent years in corporate environments, dealing with office politics and hidden agendas. I knew how to keep my cards close to my chest. He's very professional, she said finally. I'm sure he is. Well, I'm heading to bed. Don't stay up too late. I kissed her cheek, the same perfunctory gesture on roof. They were about to learn that underestimating Greg Dalton was a very expensive mistake. The next morning, I started building my intelligence network. First stop was Danny's Diner, where the town's contractors and tradesmen gathered for coffee before starting their workdays. I'd been eating breakfast there since I'd started my boat repair business, and the regulars had accepted me as one of their own. "Greg," called out Pete Morrison, a plumber who'd been working in town for 30 years. "Heard you fixed the Henderson's boat engine. That thing's been giving them trouble for months." "Just needed a new fuel pump and some attention," I said, sliding into the booth next to him. Amazing what a little care can accomplish. The conversation flowed around me. Complaints about difficult customers, gossip about local politics, speculation about the new development projects changing the character of the town. I listened carefully, filing away information about who was working where, who had access to what properties, who might be willing to help a friend in need. "Speaking of development," I said casually, "anyone here working on Carter Blaine's lakefront project?" The mood at the table shifted noticeably. Several men exchanged glances, and Pete's expression darkened. "Why do you ask?" said Jim Kowalski, an electrician who'd been installing wiring in expensive homes for decades. "Just curious. He seems to be making a big impact on the community." "Impact," Pete snorted. "That's one way to put it. The bastard's 3 months behind on payments to half the contractors in town." "Really?" "Really. Promises big bonuses for quick work, then finds excuses not to pay. My cousin Tony did the plumbing for his first phase, and Blaine still owes him 12 grand. Jim nodded grimly. Same story with the electrical work. He approved expensive upgrades, then claimed they weren't in the original contract. I had to threaten to pull my work permit to get half of what he owed me. This was interesting information. Carter Blaine wasn't just a womanizer. He was also a deadbeat who'd made enemies throughout the local business community. "Sounds like he's not as successful as he pretends to be," I said. "Oh, he's got money," Pete said. "He just doesn't like parting with it. Drives around a few members of her family who'd ever treated me with respect. His 40-foot sailboat needed a new alternator, and he'd asked me to handle the work personally." "Greg, good to see you," Harold said as I arrived at his slip. He was in his 70s, a retired banker who'd made his money the old-fashioned way, through careful investments and honest dealing. Unlike his sister Miriam, he didn't put on airs or look down on people who worked with their hands. "Morning, Harold. Let's take a look at that alternator." We worked together in companionable silence for a while, Harold handing me tools and asking intelligent questions about the repair process. He was one of the few people in Elise's family who understood that mechanical work required skill and knowledge. "How are things at home?" he asked eventually. I looked up from the engine compartment, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Miriam mentioned that you and Elise seem to be going through a rough patch. I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family thinks you're the problem." This was unexpected. "I appreciate that, Harold. Elise is my niece, and I love her, but she's always been ambitious to a fault. Sometimes ambition can make people lose sight of what's really important." He knew something. Maybe not the details, but he'd sensed the same distance in Elise that I had. "Marriage is work," I said carefully. "Sometimes people grow in different directions." "True, but sometimes people make choices that they can't undo. I hope Elise isn't making one of those choices." We finished the repair in thoughtful silence. As I packed up my tools, Harold handed me an envelope with my payment. And something extra. "There's a bonus in there," he said, "for good work and discretion. If you ever need anything at all, you call me. I mean that." I nodded, understanding that he was offering more than just future boat repairs. Harold Ashworth had connections, influence, and resources. More importantly, he was telling me that I had at least one ally in Elise's family. That afternoon, I met Mick at his garage to share what I'd learned. He'd been busy too, reaching out to his network of contacts and gathering intelligence on Carter. See that she was being played. There's something else, Mick continued. I talked to my buddy who works at the phone company. That prepaid phone Elise is using, it's been making calls to a private investigator in Portland. My blood ran cold. A PI? Guy named Stevens. Specializes in asset searches and divorce cases. Looks like your wife is building a case against you. I sat down heavily on a workbench, feeling the full weight of the conspiracy against me. It wasn't enough for Elise to cheat. She was actively working to destroy me financially. What kind of case could she build? I asked. Depends on what she's claiming. If she can prove you're hiding assets or that you've been abusive, she could get a bigger settlement. Or if she can show that your business is worth more than you've claimed, she could go after that too. I thought about the private investigator, probably digging through my financial records, looking for any discrepancy or advantage they could exploit in court. The irony was that I'd been completely honest about my finances. It was Elise who was hiding money in secret accounts and plotting deception. We need to flip the script, I said. If she wants to play detective, let's give her something to investigate. What do you have in mind? I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken that morning. Carter's Porsche parked outside Romano's restaurant. The same spot where he'd been meeting my wife for weeks. I'm thinking it's time Mr. Blaine learned that actions have consequences, I said. That evening, while Elise was at another client meeting, I put the first phase of my plan into action. I drove to Romano's and parked across the street, where I had a clear view of Carter's usual table. Sure enough, he was there with Elise, their heads close together as they shared an intimate dinner. I took photos with a telephoto lens, capturing their obvious intimacy. Then I waited. They left the restaurant together, walking to Carter's Porsche with his arm around her waist. More photos. They drove to the Lakeside Inn, where Carter had apparently booked a room for their romantic encounter. I followed at a distance, parking where I could see the hotel entrance. They disappeared inside, and I settled in to wait. Lights. I'd brought a small toolkit with me, and I went to work. I didn't vandalize the car. That would be too obvious and too easily repaired. Instead, I made subtle adjustments. I loosened the valve stems on all 4 tires. Not enough to cause a blowout, but enough to ensure they'd be flat by morning. I disconnected a few spark plug wires, creating engine problems that would be frustrating, but not immediately obvious. And I used a glass etching pen to write a message on the inside of his windshield, where it would only be visible when the sun hit it at the right angle. Cheaters never win. It was petty, but it felt good. Carter Blaine thought he could waltz into my town, steal my wife, and destroy my life without consequences. Tomorrow morning, he'd learn that someone was paying attention. I was back home before Elise, sitting in the living room with a book when she came through the door. She looked guilty and nervous, her hair still mussed from her hotel encounter. "How was your meeting?" I asked without looking up from my book. "Fine. We're making good progress on the campaign." "That's great. I'm sure Carter appreciates all your hard work." She froze at the mention of his name, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. Did I know something? Was I suspicious? Or was I just making conversation? "He's a demanding client," she said carefully. "The best ones usually are." "Well, I'm heading to bed. Don't stay up too late." I kissed her cheek and went upstairs, leaving her standing in the living room looking confused and worried. Let her wonder what I knew. Let her spend the night trying to figure out if her carefully constructed lies were falling apart. Because tomorrow, the real game would begin. Carter Blaine's morning didn't go as planned. I knew this because Frankie called me at 7 a.m. with an update from her network of informants. "Your boy had quite a morning," she said, barely containing her laughter. "Car wouldn't start. All 4 tires were flat. And when he finally got it towed to Mickey's garage, Mickey found sugar in the gas tank." "Sugar in the gas tank?" I said innocently. "That's terrible. Of course, sugar doesn't actually hurt an engine. That's just an urban legend. But Carter doesn't know that. He's convinced someone's trying to sabotage him, and he's been calling everyone in town to suffer. The second call came an hour later from Mick. Your wife just called looking for you. Sounded pretty upset. What did you tell her? That you were out on a service call and wouldn't be back until this afternoon. She wanted to know where, but I told her it was confidential client business. Elise was probably panicking, trying to figure out if Carter's car trouble was connected to her husband somehow. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, but she couldn't prove anything. I spent the morning working on a genuine boat repair, taking my time and enjoying the methodical process of fixing something that was actually broken. Around noon, I drove to the Loon's Nest for lunch and a progress report. The bar was busier than usual, filled with contractors and tradesmen who'd apparently heard about Carter's morning adventures. The mood was festive. Nobody liked the arrogant developer, and his misfortune was being treated as entertainment. Heard Blaine's having car trouble, Pete Morrison said as I sat down. Terrible thing, I replied, ordering a burger and beer. You never know what might happen to an expensive car in a working-class neighborhood. Especially when the owner has a habit of not paying his bills, added Jim Kowalski. Funny how karma works sometimes. The conversation continued in this vein, with various men sharing stories of Carter's arrogance and financial irresponsibility. I listened and nodded, playing the role of sympathetic audience while mentally cataloging every grievance. My phone buzzed with a text from Elise. Where are you? We need to talk. I showed the message to Frankie, who grinned wickedly. Sounds like someone's having a crisis of conscience. Or she's trying to figure out how much I know, I replied. Either way, you've got her attention. What's your next move? Before I could answer, the bar door opened and 3 men walked in. Carter Blaine, flanked by 2 guys in expensive suits who looked like they'd never done manual labor in their lives. The conversation in the bar died instantly. Carter looked around the room with obvious disdain, his gaze lingering on the working-class patrons as if they were specimens in a zoo. His usual confidence was intact, but I could see stress lines around his eyes. Surprised when bad things happened to them. Carter's face flushed red. Are you threatening me? Just making an observation. Maybe if you treated people with respect, they'd be more inclined to help you. The 2 men in suits moved closer to Carter, and I could see the situation escalating toward violence. That wasn't what I wanted. A bar fight would only complicate things and potentially hurt innocent people. I stood up and walked over to Carter, extending my hand with a friendly smile. Mr. Blaine, isn't it? I'm Greg Dalton. I think you know my wife, Elise. Carter's expression shifted from anger to surprise to calculation. He shook my hand, probably wondering if this was coincidence or confrontation. Of course, he said smoothly. Elise speaks of you often. You're in the boat repair business, I believe. That's right. I fix things that are broken. I smiled pleasantly, but there was steel in my voice. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you understand how things work. We stared at each other for a moment, 2 men sizing each other up while the entire bar watched. Carter was taller and better dressed, but I had home field advantage and the support of everyone in the room. Well, Carter said finally, I should get going. If anyone remembers anything about last night, please give me a call. He handed out business cards that nobody took, then left with his companions. The tension in the room evaporated as soon as the door closed behind them. That was interesting, Mick said, appearing at my elbow. Think he knows you're onto him? He suspects something. But suspecting and knowing are 2 different things. I finished my lunch and drove home, where I found Elise pacing in the kitchen like a caged animal. She looked haggard and nervous, her usual composure cracking under pressure. Where have you been? She demanded. I've been trying to reach you all day. Working. You know, that thing I do to pay the bills. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out a beer, deliberately casual. Why? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. We need to talk. About what? She studied my face, looking for signs of deception or hidden knowledge. About us. About our marriage. This was it. The moment she'd been building toward for weeks. She was going to ask for a divorce. probably claim that we'd grown apart. Restaurant and the Lakeside Inn. I mean the prepaid phone in your desk drawer and the private investigator you hired to dig up dirt on me. She opened and closed her mouth several times, but no sound came out. All her careful planning, all her secret meetings and whispered phone calls, and she'd never considered that her husband might be smart enough to figure it out. Greg, I can explain. Can you? Can you explain why you've been lying to me for months while planning to destroy my life? Can you explain why you've been letting another man brag about seducing a desperate housewife? That last part hit home. Her face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like the woman I'd married 8 years ago, vulnerable and human, instead of the polished PR executive she'd become. He said that? Among other things. Turns out your boyfriend likes to kiss and tell. She sank into a chair across from me, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I never meant for it to go so far. But it did go that far. The question is, what happens now? She wiped her eyes, trying to regain some composure. I want a divorce, Greg. I'm sorry, but I do. We're not happy together, and staying married isn't fair to either of us. You're right, I said, surprising her. We're not happy. But I'm curious, what made you think I'd just roll over and let you and Carter take everything I've worked for? We're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to end this amicably. Doing a harsh sound that made her flinch. Amicably? Is that what you call hiring a private investigator and planning to claim I'm hiding assets? She had the grace to look ashamed. That was Carter's idea. He said we needed to protect ourselves. Protect yourselves from what? From me finding out that you've been cheating and lying for months? From you trying to hide money or make things difficult in the divorce? The only one hiding money is you, Elise. I know about the secret account, the cash withdrawals, the credit cards I've never seen. If anyone's going to have trouble in divorce court, it's not going to be me. She stared at me in shock, realizing that her husband wasn't the clueless victim she thought he was. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. Difference is, I'm better at it than he is. She stood up, her composure returning as she shifted back into defensive mode. I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings. You do that. But remember what I said. If you want this to be amicable, then keep it amicable. If you want it to be a war, I'm ready for that too. She left the room without another word, and I heard her car pull out of the driveway 5 minutes later, probably going straight to Carter to report on our conversation and plan their next move. Maze let them plan. I had moves of my own to make, and they were about to discover that underestimating Greg Dalton was the biggest mistake of their lives. 3 days after my confrontation with Elise, Carter Blaine made his first serious mistake. He came to my shop. I was working on a vintage Chris Craft when I heard the Porsche pull up outside. He'd apparently gotten his car problems sorted out. Through the window, I watched him sit in the driver's seat for several minutes, probably gathering courage or rehearsing his speech. He finally got out and walked into my shop like he owned the place, wearing a $1,000 suit and an expression of smug superiority. This was his attempt at a power play, coming to my territory to intimidate me into submission. Greg, he said, not offering to shake hands, we need to talk. About what? I continued working on the engine, not looking up. About Elise. About the situation we find ourselves in. What situation is that? He moved closer, trying to use his height advantage to loom over me. Look, I know this is awkward, but we're all adults here. Elise and I have feelings for each other, and she wants to end her marriage. There's no reason this has to get ugly. I set down my wrench and looked at him directly. You're right. There's no reason it has to get ugly. But that depends on you. On me? On whether you keep treating me like I'm stupid. See, I know about the private investigator, Carter. I know about your financial problems and your unpaid contractors and your ex-wife in Boston, who's still trying to collect alimony. I know you see Elise as a meal ticket. She's just going through the motions with you until the divorce is final. Last night, she was in my bed telling me how much she regrets ever marrying a loser like you. The words were designed to hurt, to make me angry and reckless. But I've been expecting this kind of psychological warfare, and I was ready for it. Is that what she told you? I said calmly. That's interesting, because last night she was at her sister's house for dinner. I have the credit card receipts to prove it. Carter's face flushed red. He'd been caught in a lie, and we both knew it. The point is, he continued, trying to recover, she doesn't want to be married to you anymore. The smart thing would be to make this easy on everyone and give her what she wants. And what does she want? A clean divorce, 50-50 split of assets, no alimony, no drama. I almost laughed. 50-50? For a woman who's been planning to leave me for months while hiding money and hiring investigators to build a case against me? She's entitled to half of everything you've built together. Everything we've built together? This shop is mine. I started it with my own money after losing my engineering job. The house was mine before we got married. The boat, the tools, the equipment, all mine. What exactly has Elise contributed to our marriage besides lies and betrayal? Carter was getting frustrated now, his careful negotiation strategy falling apart. Look, you can make this difficult if you want, but it's not going to change the outcome. Elise is leaving you either way. You're right about that. But the outcome depends on how she leaves. If she wants to be reasonable, I'll be reasonable. If she wants to play dirty, I can play dirtier. Are you threatening her? I'm promising her, and you. If you try to destroy me, I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of man Carter Blaine really is. Nobody cares what a washed-up mechanic thinks. Maybe not. But they might care what Pete Morrison thinks, or Jim Kowalski, or the dozen other contractors you've stiffed. They might care what your ex-wife in Boston has to say about your character. They might care about the real reason your last development project ended in bankruptcy. Carter went very still. What can't imagine? I can make your life very difficult. You can try. But remember, I fix things for a living, including things that other people have broken. We stared at each other for a long moment. Two men who'd moved beyond pretense into open hostility. Carter was bigger and richer, but I was on my home turf, with nothing left to lose. This isn't over, he said finally. No, it's not, but it will be soon. He left without another word, his Porsche spraying gravel as he accelerated out of my parking lot. I watched him go, then pulled out my phone and called Mick. It's time for phase 2, I said. That evening, while Elise was packing clothes into suitcases, she'd apparently decided to move in with Carter while the divorce was pending, I put my plan into action. First, I drove to Carter's lakefront house and planted a small GPS tracker under his car. Not to stalk him, but to document his movements for the divorce proceedings. If he was going to claim he was just Elise's business associate, I wanted proof of how much time they were spending together. Next, I visited 3 of the contractors Carter had stiffed and made them an offer. I would pay their outstanding invoices in exchange for liens on Carter's properties and their cooperation in a legal matter. It cost me $15,000, most of my savings, but it was worth it to see the look on their faces when they realized someone was finally going to hold Carter accountable. Finally, I stopped by Harold Ashworth's house. Elise's uncle was working in his garden, and he looked up with a sad smile when he saw me approaching. Greg, I heard about the divorce. I'm sorry. Thank you, Harold. I wanted you to know that I don't blame Elise entirely. She made bad choices, but she was manipulated by someone who saw her as an opportunity. Harold nodded grimly. Carter Blaine. I've been hearing disturbing things about that man. What kind of things? Financial irregularities, questions about his business practices, the kind of whispers that follow a man who cuts corners and breaks promises. I pulled out a folder and handed it to him. Then you might find this interesting. It's a complete financial analysis of Blaine Development Group, including their debt structure, pending lawsuits, and cash flow problems. About to make a very expensive mistake. And someone should warn her. She might not listen. When people are in love, they don't always think clearly. She's not in love, Harold. She's in lust. There's a difference, and she'll figure it out eventually. The question is whether she'll figure it out before or after Carter has access to her bank accounts. I left Harold's house feeling like I'd accomplished something important. Elise might not listen to me anymore, but she'd always respected her uncle's judgment. If anyone could make her see reason, it was him. The next morning brought news that Carter's troubles were multiplying. Frankie called to report that the State Attorney General's office had opened an investigation into Blaine Development Group's business practices. Apparently, several investors had filed complaints about misrepresented financial statements and missing funds. How did that happen? I asked innocently. Funny thing about government investigations, Frankie said. Sometimes they start with anonymous tips from concerned citizens. Sometimes those tips include detailed financial documents and witness statements. Imagine that. Yeah, imagine. Anyway, word is that Carter's been calling lawyers all morning, trying to find someone to represent him. Turns out most of the good attorneys in town have conflicts of interest. What kind of conflicts? The kind where they're already representing contractors who have claims against him. I smiled. It was amazing how quickly a man's world could fall apart when the people he'd wronged decided to fight back. That afternoon, Elise came to the shop. She looked haggard and stressed, her usual polish replaced by the frazzled appearance of a woman whose carefully ordered life was coming apart. "We need to talk," she said. "I'm listening." "Harold showed me some documents about Carter's business. He says you gave them to him." "I did." "Are they real?" "What do you think?" She sat down heavily on a workbench, suddenly looking older than her 41 years. "I think I've made a terrible mistake." "Which mistake would that be? Cheating on your husband, lying for months, or falling for a con man?" "All of it," she said quietly. "I'm sorry, Greg. I'm so sorry." The apology was too little and too late, but I could see that she meant it. The woman sitting in my shop wasn't the calculating adulteress who'd been planning my destruction. She was someone who'd realized she'd been played by sympathy, but the ugly, wrenching sobs of someone whose world had collapsed. I felt a moment of pity for her. She'd been victimized too, in her own way. "I've ruined everything," she said. "My marriage, my reputation, my family's respect. And for what? For a man who was just using me. You made choices, Elise. Bad choices. But you can still make better ones." "Like what?" "Like telling the truth. About Carter, about the private investigator, about the money you've been hiding. Help me understand what really happened. And maybe we can end this without destroying each other completely." She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "You'd do that? After everything I've done to you? I'd consider it. But only if you're completely honest with me. No more lies, no more games. The truth. All of it." She nodded slowly. "Okay. Yes, I'll tell you everything." And she did. For the next 2 hours, Elise told me the whole sordid story. How Carter had pursued her relentlessly. How he'd made her feel desired and important. How he'd gradually convinced her that I was holding her back from the life she deserved. She told me about the private investigator, the hidden money, the plans to claim I was emotionally abusive to get a bigger settlement. It was painful to hear, but it was also liberating. Finally, after months of suspicion and uncertainty, I knew the truth. "What happens now?" she asked when she'd finished. "Now, we get divorced. Quietly, fairly, without trying to destroy each other. You keep what's yours, I keep what's mine, and we both move on with our lives. And Carter? Carter's not your problem anymore. He's got bigger things to worry about than your divorce." As if summoned by our conversation, Carter's Porsche pulled into my parking lot. He got out of the car, moving fast, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "Elise," he called, "what are you doing here?" She stood up slowly, wiping her eyes. "Talking to my husband. Your soon-to-be ex-husband. We had an agreement. We had a lot of things, Carter. Most of them were lies." He looked back and forth between us, trying to assess the situation. "What has he been telling you?" "The truth. Connections, resources. You have nothing," I interrupted. "Your investors are pulling out, your contractors are filing liens, and the state is investigating you for fraud. It's finished, Carter." He looked around my shop like a trapped animal, his eyes wild with desperation. For a moment, I thought he might try something violent, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. "This isn't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes, it is," Elise said firmly. "We're done, Carter. I'm going back to my husband to discuss our divorce like civilized adults. You should probably call a lawyer." Carter stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked back to his car without another word. We watched him drive away, probably for the last time. "Thank you," Elise said quietly. "For what?" "For not letting me make an even bigger mistake than I already have." I nodded, feeling something like closure settling over me. The marriage was over, but at least it would end with honesty instead of lies. "One more thing," I said. "The apron." "What?" "At your mother's house, when you made me serve dinner in that ridiculous apron while you entertained your friends. That's when I knew our marriage was really over." She looked ashamed. "I'm sorry about that too. It was cruel and unnecessary." "Yes, it was. But it also taught me something important." "What?" "That I deserve better than someone who's embarrassed by me. We both deserve better than what we became." She nodded, tears starting again. "I hope you find it, Greg. I hope you find someone who appreciates what a good man you are. I hope you find what you're looking for too, Elise. Just make sure it's real next time." She left then, and I was alone in my shop with the smell of motor oil and the sound of water lapping against the marina docks. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when I'd married Elise 8 years ago, but it was honest and clean. 6 months later, the divorce was final. Elise kept her car, her jewelry, and the savings account she'd tried to hide. I kept the house, the business, and my self-respect. Carter Blaine was facing federal charges for investment fraud and had fled to a state without extradition treaties. Ability heard through Frankie's network that Elise had moved to Portland and taken a job with a non-profit organization. She was reportedly dating a teacher, a good man who appreciated her intelligence and treated her with respect. Mexico. Turns out he'd been running the same scam down there, seducing wealthy women and using their money to fund fake development projects. Good. Maybe his victims will finally get some justice. There's more. His ex-wife in Boston is writing a book about their marriage. Working title is Married to a Monster: How I Survived a Financial Predator. I laughed. Think it'll be a bestseller? With all the women he's scammed over the years? Definitely. We sat on my dock drinking beer and watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and red. It was peaceful, beautiful, and completely mine. "Any regrets?" Mick asked. I thought about it for a moment. About the marriage ending? No. About the way it ended? Sometimes. I wish Elise had been honest with me from the beginning. We might have been able to work things out, or at least end things more gracefully. But then you wouldn't have had the satisfaction of destroying Carter Blaine. True, that was pretty satisfying. We clinked our beer bottles together in a toast to justice served and lessons learned. Later that night, as I sat in my house, not our house anymore, I found myself thinking about the apron incident that had started it all. At the time, it had felt like the ultimate humiliation, being reduced to kitchen help while my wife entertained her friends and discussed her lover. But looking back, I realized it had been a gift. It had shown me exactly where I stood in my marriage, and given me the motivation to fight for something better. I'd served the turkey that night, wearing a ridiculous pink apron, while everyone laughed at my expense. But in the end, I was the one who'd carved up the people who'd tried to destroy me. Carter Blaine was in prison, his reputation and business empire in ruins. Elise had learned a painful lesson about the difference between love and manipulation. And I was free. Truly free. For the first time in years. I raised my glass of bourbon to the empty house and spoke aloud. I wore the apron, but you were the consequences.